Sounds good. Got it. Yay, hello. Welcome, everybody. Get started here in just a minute or two. It's nice to be able to put faces with the names, which is great. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing screen. And I'm going to ask Becky if she'll let me share, please. Hi, Lauren.
Wendy, you should be able to share now. Sorry about that.
All right, there we go. Cool. Well, awesome. I'm glad everybody's with us today. And then joining us, it's going to be just going to be a casual conversation. If you've ever done book club with us before, in the past, we had set it up more as a webinar. And I interviewed the author and we talked back and forth and you all talked in the chat box. But now we're going to go ahead, and I really wanted to hear from you all and hear your experiences as we read through the book and what your takeaways are and what your ideas are as well. So I'm going to pose questions with the slides, and then you will respond by unmuting your microphone or typing in the chat. And the top 3 participants, as determined by our facilitators, will win prizes. What are the prizes, you may ask? Well, if you don't already have one, it could be a Master Gardener lunchbox. Maybe you already have one of those, but you could get another one. Florida Friendly Landscaping has new stickers out, so you would be one of the first people to get a sticker pack from Florida Friendly Landscaping. So that might be a good gift for you if you're a top participant. And then all of you, I know, want to have a flower crown to wear around while you're in the garden. You might wear a little flower crown around. So those are your choices of gifts for our top 3 participants. All right. And do we wear flower crowns around the office? Yes, sometimes we do. Sometimes we do. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first. Oh, we got the chat box. Let me take a look. Debbie can't find the camera. I'm sure you will, Deb, at some point. Okay, good. Julia, I'm glad. I think it'll all come back to you. Julia said, I read it years ago. Didn't have time to reread it, but she was interested in participating as well. So that's good. All right. So our first slide, our first question is, where are you joining us from? You can either unmute and talk, or you can pop it in the chat box.
I'm in Nicaragua.
What? You're in Nicaragua?
Yeah, I'm visiting the kids.
That's wonderful. Great. And what county are you usually from?
Lee.
Okay, great. Okay, down in Fort Myers. Terrific.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, we got them in the chat box. Okay, Mary's from Osceola. Debbie is from Alachua. Shanna is from Volusia County. Shanna, I was just in New Smyrna Beach yesterday. Natasha and I were both there. We went to the Yopon Tea company over there. Cindy's in from Jacksonville. Carol is in Fairhope, Alabama. And Julie is in Boca Raton. Lauren, we know, is in Ocala. I know is in Ocala. And Barbara is coming in from Newberry. Teresa is coming in from Lottie, Florida. And Gail is coming in from Coral Springs in Broward County. And Debbie's from Alachua. Awesome. And Natasha and I are here in Gainesville, and Becky, our facilitator, is also in Gainesville. Alice is coming in from Jacksonville. Well, good. We got a nice sampling from across the state, so that's cool. All right. Did good. Okay. Next up, our first question slide is, have you ever seen any of the gardens that were described in the book? Have you ever been there? Anybody want to chime in?
This is Barb from Newberry.
Uh-huh.
I've been to Monticello, and I think I went in the fall. So it was a while ago, and I don't remember it, but I do remember the vistas, and I remember seeing the slave quarters, but that's about it.
Mhm. Anybody else been to Monticello?
I have, this is Lauren.
Mhm.
I've been to Monticello, Montpelier, and to Washington. I've been to everything except James Madison's.
Okay, all right. Anybody else at Monticello?
Yes.
I have. This is Jane from St. Johns County.
Okay,
I was there just a couple of years ago after things settled down a little after COVID. And it was lovely. I had been there many, many years ago when my children were little, but it's just a most gorgeous place. And I love the gardens there, and just a beautiful place. And to think that Thomas Jefferson knew so much about gardening so many years ago, hundreds of years ago. It's just amazing.
yeah,
And I have read the book, but quite a while ago, but really enjoyed it. And then
Good.
been to Mount Vernon as well, several times over the years. And what a beautiful place as well. Sitting right there, looking over the Potomac River. Gardens are gorgeous. So
yeah. I've only been to Mount Vernon, and I've driven past Charlottesville. I mean, I've been in town, and I have not gone to Monticello yet, so I need to do that.
it's a must.
Good. And what about Mount Vernon, or what about Montpelier? Has anybody been there? That's beyond.
I have. I
What-
went last year. We were driving home from New York, upstate New York, where our kids live, and we just saw a sign and we went, and it is beautiful. The countryside is very close to the same area as Monticello.
Yes, it is.
So it's and it's beautiful, and rolling hills, horse farms. It's just beautiful country. The gardens are gorgeous.
And how much to get into Monticello? I think it's kind of expensive, isn't it? Maybe $15-20 or something like that. And
I think you could go on the grounds of either one of them without paying.
okay.
I think the fee is to get inside the building. When I was at Montpelier, I could not go inside the building because it was still kind of post-COVID. They still hadn't they only allowed so many people in at a time, and you had to make your reservations 2 weeks in advance. So we walked around the grounds, and we walked inside the building and saw a movie. So the movie showed about James Madison and how he designed the gardens. It was a great movie. It's a movie that every American should see. Let me put it that way.
All right. Okay. Now next time I'm in Virginia, I've got my marching orders.
Right.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, Rita.
Go ahead,
Hi.
Rita.
Yeah, I had been to Charlottesville and to Monticello probably about 15 years ago. And then I had been to DC as a 4-H'er about 50 years ago. And we did get to see the gardens there also. So yeah, but I wish now that I'd like to go back now that I have a sense of gardening that I didn't have when I was an 18-year-old.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I
So
think
I
there's
was-
somebody else who wants to jump
Yeah.
in too.
This is Julia. I was at the Adams home in Quincy, and I don't remember that there was any garden to speak of. And this was since I read the book, I think, in the last 10 years, and there just wasn't really much there. And the other gardens I've been to as a child or a young woman, because I grew up in Virginia. So,
Okay.
but there should be more garden there at the Adams house or
Right.
houses.
Yeah, it's well, I was thinking about the funding. It's not easy to keep up these gardens, and the entrance fees and grants and foundation monies and those sort of things are they lean on those things really hard. I know that Monticello has probably a little bit bigger source of funding than the others. And then I think Mount Vernon is part of the National Park Service. But you know, it's hard to maintain a garden, as you, as all of you know, it takes money and time and volunteers and paid staff, and it's, you know, it's not always just a slam dunk on that. So, was there necessarily any inspiration from any of these gardens that you would want to speak to? Somebody mentioned the vistas. We don't always get vistas here in Florida. We have to create them, right? So, all right. So our next
you know-
question. Oh, someone's in the chat. Let me see. Oh, Carol said the native plants. Yeah, definitely. Looking at those native plants. And Cindy said she's been to all. Jefferson's was the most impressive. And okay, good.
Well, I'll share if you let me. This is Barb again.
Of course.
I think it was interesting how they were trying to decide between using the formality of the British and the French gardens and, you know, laying everything out in little rows and beds and stuff, and then sort of switched over to the more natural sweeping pathways and tree lined areas. And I think I'd like to put both elements in my yard, and I'm not quite sure how to merge them yet. So that I thought that was really interesting.
Agreed. Does anybody else agree with Barbara on that? Yeah, I think so too. And if I think when I revisit these gardens, I'm really going to look for those elements, the use of the native plants and the formality versus the more natural borders and the sweeping borders. That would be really fun to take a good look at, and the inclusion of edibles, which I think was lost on me before. Oh, and Cindy says she remembers the microclimates that Jefferson used. Yeah, he was really tuned into the land using those for sure. And then Carol says she prefers the cottage look instead of the trimmed unnatural shapes. Yep. All right, agreed. Good. We're all thinking about similar things. Okay. Gail just looked up Monticello. It's pricey, $42 for family friendly tour, $13 for each child. That's a pretty big day, $42. Yep, for sure. Okay, next one up is Bartram's garden, which I love the story of him visiting Bartram's nursery, you know, as they were working on the Constitutional Congress. I mean, to me, that was probably one of the biggest take home stories or messages. I enjoyed that the most, that, you know, a visit to the nursery maybe shook out how the country was formed. I'm sure that that's very much fiction, but I don't know. I don't know what you all thought about that, but so Bartram's Gardens was filled with plants from all over the country, a blend of each state most characteristic plants. Which plants do you think best define Florida?
Live oaks.
Yeah, live oaks.
I'd say
Sable
the
palms.
magnolias. I feel like it's such a southern staple. You know, people from up north recognize Florida when they see the big green and dark brown, different colored leaves and the big white flowers, and they're fragrant. I mean, you drive down to Disney and, you know, they're everywhere.
Carol
think of
says
the sable
longleaf
palm.
pine. Sable palm, Julia?
Yeah, I think that, to me, that defines Florida. I mean, Florida's palm trees, right?
I agree with the sable, yeah. But I know, are there sables up there? Would they survive up there? They'd have to be in an enclosure, I guess.
There's some, I think, sable palms on the Chesapeake. I think it's mild enough there. It's not
Okay.
positive sable palms, but there are palms up there.
Remember we
That
read
were moved there. They're
we
not
read
native.
that Palmetto book before. That was
Yeah.
last 2 years ago, and they said that the northern limit was the dismal swamp in Virginia, and that must be close. That's probably on the bay, right?
No, I don't think so.
No. Okay.
I don't think so.
No, the Dismal Swamp is between North Carolina and Virginia on the coast.
Okay. Okay, so that's where they say the sable goes up to, in nature, but it might be planted a little bit higher, so.
Yeah, I think it survives on the Chesapeake, but not native there.
Natasha says cypress as a Florida tree, which is a good one too. Yeah. Any other plants? I think, I think hibiscus, our native hibiscus, is sort of a plant that I think of, and none of us are jumping up and down and saying oranges, are we? No.
Not
Barbara
native.
says gumbo limbo. Yeah. Where else does that grow in the United States? Yeah. And Alice says kunti, right? Absolutely. Those are very definitive Florida plants. I love it. Good. All right. Our next slide up is on page 96 and 97, Wulf details Jefferson's excitement over the possibility of producing sugar in the U.S. from sugar maples instead of relying on imports. Similar sentiments have arisen in modern times with catastrophes like the COVID-19 pandemic disrupting our food system. Is self-sufficiency something that you are hoping to achieve in your garden? And is there anything you don't have to buy because you grow it yourself?
Wendy, this is Margaret, and I live in New Hampshire during the summer, and I never buy any vegetables because they all come out of my garden. Every single thing. And I just planted some sugar maples, but sugar maples are going to be compromised with this warming trend that we're having.
Oh,
Yeah, so
sure.
that's gonna be a big impact on New Hampshire and Vermont. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. That is something. Yep. Carol says she doesn't buy many herbs, and I think I love growing herbs as self-sufficiency because you are, you're getting exactly what you need when you need it. It's fresh. It's not, I have a pack of cilantro rotting in the fridge right now, of course, because we can't grow it in the summer and you're stuck. So Alice says just vegetables and herbs in season. And Teresa no longer buys herbs. Yeah, that's a real nice self-sufficient crop to grow. My avocado's taking the summer off. My avocado goes every other year. I don't know about your fruit trees. What about fruit when it's in season? I bet some of you all are growing fruit.
Oh, I have blueberries that I freeze, once I collect all of them.
Yeah.
Mangoes.
Mango
ice cream.
Oh, that's the best. Gail says pineapple. That's great. My daughter's living in a new neighborhood in Orlando. And the neighbor across the street from her, all she has in her front yard are pineapple plants. I'm
Wow.
thinking, gosh, that's dedication, but it's a small yard and she loves pineapples. So that's what she's doing. Cindy says lemons and limes and grapefruit when they're ready. That's awesome. Those are great.
I have pineapple and get them before the critters do. So
The squirrels, right? What other critters are bothering you, Rita? Is it
Raccoon.
squirrels?
raccoons all the
Oh,
time.
yeah, sure. Yeah,
And I
definitely.
had a peach tree, but they don't last forever. Okay, so I had it maybe for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and the peach tree itself doesn't last forever, and the peaches themselves don't last forever.
Yeah, everything's seasonal. The blueberry
Okay,
is too. But again, that's seasonal.
right. Okay, we got to go to Mary Gorman's house because she never buys herbs. And she has traded them for mangoes, and she harvested 38 pineapples this summer.
Wow.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Carol's got persimmon, which is good. And Gail's get all of her mangoes from a neighbor too. Yeah, about the sharing. So, what really came away from me from the book was that feeling of being self-sufficient, of trying to plant for that was kind of a revolutionary act. We are independent. We're not tied to the home country. We want to be ourselves, and have the native plants of our country, and not having to rely on others, on imports to fill our larders and our refrigerators and our stores. So I think a lot of people did feel that way after COVID, and that kind of brought up that wonderful resurgence in home gardening, and really woke people up and said, I've got to be able to create my own food and figure out how to grow stuff. I think that's a real boon for us as master gardeners and horticulturalists, that more people are interested in growing their own food. Any thoughts on that before we click on to the next slide? All right. There was a lot of controversy between the founding fathers about whether the grounds of the White House should be grand or subdued. If you were in charge, if I gave you the magic wand and a nice budget, if you were in charge of the project, what would you have picked? What do you think about the grounds of the White House now? I don't,
Probably a mix of, I would say a mix of both.
Okay.
That you want to show, some beauty, some artificial beauty, if you will, and also our agrarian origin, although we're not very agrarian anymore.
Yeah, I think it's pretty grand, and a gorgeous green lawn. But yeah, the native plants help out. But some natives are hard to confine and keep it formal.
Yeah. Carol says subdued and all native. I think that's an interesting take. I would agree as far as the trees go, for sure it should be native. And she liked the Obama's vegetable garden, and a lot of people learned from it. So I was thinking about the White House vegetable garden before we got going today, and I wanted to make sure it was still in place and still being used. So I checked, and it is. The vegetable garden is still, and Michelle's garden is it's in the same spot. It's not as big as it was, but it's still there. It stayed in the last administration, and Jill Biden is also gardening and making sure that food is coming into the White House from the garden as well. And but one of the things that the author Andrea Wulf didn't mention in the book was that Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, she grew the first vegetable garden on the White House grounds. So she grew all their fresh fruits and vegetables to feed their family, and instead of buying the produce at the local markets. So that was a tradition that started in 1800, having a veggie garden at the White House. So I think that is really important, that we show our self-sufficiency in that way. Okay, so people have got some stuff. And Debbie says, I found awe in how Washington found such solace in his home garden and wanted them transplanted from Jefferson's forest. I think that's an excellent point. I think one of the things that we got from this book is that they use the garden to kind of heal themselves from the war, from the turmoil, from the beginnings of this country that we have. They went to the garden to find respite and comfort there. So I think that's an excellent point. Yes, the Abigail Adams, the spirit, Lauren says she has this New England spirit of self-sufficiency. That's funny. I mean, if you've ever been around a real New Englander, you know that they are self-sufficient. So I'm going to tell a little story, Wendy, in our little stories, right? So my dad was from Jaffrey, New Hampshire. So that's a little town in New Hampshire. And he and my grandfather were building a fence, and my dad dropped a nail, and he went into his bag to pick up another nail. And my grandfather said, "You need to find that nail." And he said, "Why? It's just a nail." And he said, "I want to use that nail because it will be the third time we use it." So he had recognized that nail And I guess it had been in other projects and he knew it could be used again. So my dad found that nail and it went into that fence. So I thought that's kind of a New England spirit story, isn't it? So, so the White House, is, I think, beautiful. I think our rose garden there is certainly well known. The rose garden, I think, got reworked recently, but I'm still glad that the vegetable garden is still there and that we have those beautiful formal plantings to kind of show the grandeur of the structure, and yet still have a lot of our beautiful plants there too. All right, our next slide. The seeds that Lewis and Clark brought back with them promise a way to view a landscape that no white American other than the members of Lewis and Clark expedition had ever seen. Have you gotten to experience another place through plants?
That's a very, very weird question. But I mean, if we traveled someplace, then yes, I've traveled through the giant redwood forests of Northern California, which is just amazing. And you're never going to see anything like that down here. And I've lived in Seattle. So, you know, all of the Pacific Northwest is so different from this climate and environment.
Yeah, I agree. This is Lauren. I agree totally. I've lived in 4 states and I've traveled extensively around the world, and I try to go to botanical gardens wherever I go. And the one that was the most impressive for me was in Singapore, going to the orchid gardens. And I wasn't even that into orchids. This was a long time ago I was there, and I never saw anything like it. I mean, oh, just absolutely amazing. And of course, Hawaii, all over. I just came back from Turkey. The plants there were just amazing. So, I mean, every place I go, I compare and I see plants that I have no idea what they are, and sometimes use the apps to try to figure it out. And speaking about Seattle, our daughter lives in Seattle, and I've had this experience many times going through the national parks or wherever, where I see plants I have no idea what they are. And the app has helped me. And sometimes I see they're not native to that area either. But everyone thinks that certain parts of the world are so barren. And we were in Death Valley last year, and the plants are absolutely gorgeous there. You just have to have a different perspective.
Yeah, and in the chat box, Alice said the California native landscape so different from Florida landscapes. Yeah. Just you're in a different world. And then Shanna mentioned the Joshua trees in California. You know, what else looks like that? You know, that does that is, I think that Natasha's question, this was Natasha's question, was what she meant by it was, you know, have you ever someone gave you the plant, or you experienced the plant in Florida, but it transported you to the other space? So like, I think about the first chocolate tree that I saw down in South Florida. Of course, it's native to South America. And I imagined what it would look like in South America. So that's kind of the angle that she was taking with that, you know, or that maybe you all remember 30, 40 years ago, someone gave you an anthurium plant and it was from Hawaii, and you're like, oh, this is, you know, this was going to transport me to Hawaii in a way. So
Wendy, I have one other experience. I grow a very small native coffee here, you know, a wild coffee, and it's very small. I was in Ecuador last year, and the wild coffee trees are probably 30, 40 feet tall. And I immediately noticed that it was a wild coffee tree because it had the same leaves. And I said, holy cow, we grow them and they're just little, you know, little bushes. That was pretty interesting.
that is so cool. So do you think it was Psychotria? It was that genus?
Yes, it was definitely the genus. Species, maybe not, but I mean, they said wild coffee on it. I was at the Darwin Center. That's where I saw it. And it was amazing because I said, my God, what is that tree? And I looked at it. I said, that's got to be coffee. And it said wild coffee.
Yeah. And Natasha put in the chat box, she sees plants here that reminds her of a other place, like seeing coffee plants reminds her of Costa Rica. So, yeah.
I just
Yeah.
when I moved to Florida 30 years ago, just driving down from New England, when I got to South Florida, it's like, it is so different. So we talk about experiences of going elsewhere to the West Coast or Singapore or wherever where it's really different, but just coming to South Florida from the north it just looked so different.
Oh,
And then sometimes it felt really good actually to get back to New England. The first time I was back, I felt like I was back home. Of course, that's all gone now. This is home and has been for a long time, but there was a relationship with the plants, with the landscape that I didn't expect.
No, I
But is-
agree with. I came down from Pennsylvania, and this is totally different from what Pennsylvania landscape's like. But even now, when I see or go to places where there's carnivorous plants, it's like I'm transported back to the Jurassic age. You know, I'm walking outdoors, and I just love the sundews and all the boggy stuff. So I really didn't know there were carnivorous plants down here until I started taking the Master Naturalist stuff. So that was exciting to find, really.
Yeah, as you know, some of those carnivorous, like our little sundews and our little butterworts, you know, you've been walking on them for 5 minutes before you realize you're here seeing this special, you know, the super special plant. I remember being on a field trip and my professor being like, well, you're standing in the middle of like the best stand of sundew in this whole park. I'm like, oh no. So yeah. That is like not only taking you to a different place, but to a different time. Yeah. And I also think about that for the Norfolk Island pines and any of that Araucaria species or genus with the monkey puzzle tree and the Norfolk pines, because they are, you know, that's an ancient species from way back when that only grows in that part of the world. So Gail says, not another place, but as I walk in my yard, I treasure the memories of the people who had given me the plants. And I've shared with so many people. Oh yeah, that's for sure. Yep, and so sometimes when I remind master gardeners, when you're working that phone and somebody says, oh, my Christmas cactus is dying, and it may be in your brain, you're like, well, you know, that's too bad, but you can go buy another one for $5, you know, at Publix. But maybe someone's grandmother gave that to them or their great aunt, and now they're gone. And this is the only piece of them that's continuing on. So that's really, really good to think about those memories too. Or, you know, that's a very excellent point. And Margaret says, what I had in New Hampshire as houseplants are outdoor shrubs in Southwest Florida. That's for sure. And then Debbie said, Brook Green Sculpture Garden is beautiful botanical gardens in Brook Green Gardens in DC and the Arizona Desert Museum. I learned that cactus used to not have thorns. They develop them for protection. Oh, that's neat. Okay. And Lauren said, when I moved, I tried to bring some plants when possible as a memory of my mom and sister, particularly irises. Yeah. Plants are more than just green things out in the garden. You know, they really tug on our heartstrings too. Okay, our next one up is, and this is a good segue into this. Wolf writes about how the various pieces of Monticello's landscape represented Jefferson's inspirations and were reminders of his accomplishments. Are there any plants or areas in your garden that remind you of a part of your personal history?
Okay, this is Barb. This is going to be sort of too much information that you don't really want to know, but I used to weigh 300 pounds. And when I decided that I was finally going to do something about it, what I decided to do was put in a raised bed garden. So I put in 15 4x8 raised bed gardens outside the house the summer that I started my weight loss journey, and I'm over 100 pounds down now. That was
Wow.
13 years ago, and it's still going strong.
Wow. That's amazing. Congratulations, Barb. Yay, good. That's cool. Rosa Sharon is the flower of South Korea, and my children are adopted from South Korea. Oh, that's beautiful, Lauren. That's beautiful. Super nice.
This is Julia. The native plants that I have that are the first native plants I put in, which have now most of my yard is native plants. But that sort of grounds me in when I started getting into native plants. And most of the first ones I put in are still there. And I see them from my desk and see
And
the
so
birds and the butterflies.
they were the part of your native plant journey. That was the beginning of your
Yeah,
native
that was
plant
the
journey.
beginning of it.
Really cool.
After reading about Doug Tallamy, like, oh, I should be doing native plants.
Yeah,
And my yard has been transformed.
that's beautiful. Cindy says the ponytail palms that were tiny at our wedding 25 years ago in the backyard are now huge. Yes, ponytail palms can get huge and they flower, which is amazing. I had a little one that I got when I was a kid that was about this big, in a tiny little pot. It went on to be about 15 feet tall. That's a story for another time. If you really want to hear my ponytail palm story, I'll tell you, but we'll wait. Natasha says whenever she sees pineapple plants, she remembers it being a child, her mom would give her the tops, and that's what she would grow in the backyard. That's a neat memory. And Barbara said she is reminded of her mistake by planting bamboo between her and her neighbors. Oh man. And Margaret says her asparagus patch, she put in a high raised bed this past summer to make sure that she always has these long-lived vegetables. As someone who grew up in Florida, seeing asparagus for the first time in a real perennial patch was a very much an eye-opener for me. And Susanna says, when we moved from North Carolina to Florida, my next door neighbor gave me cuttings from her gardenias, which I planted in Gainesville, and they thrive beautifully. Well, that is nice. That's not always a slam dunk, so that's good. And Debbie says, locust trees and veggie gardens reminder of childhood. It's part of her history. Yeah, I love the wedding one. Alice says she has some of the same roses here that I loved in my California garden. Amongst mostly Florida natives. Yeah, roses are real strong memories for a lot of us. Someone has a favorite rose or they tended their rose bushes. My mom's favorite rose was Tropicana. I don't grow that one, but and she also did real well with Carefree Beauty. Nobody asked me, but I'm gonna tell you. So I got a call maybe last year from one of my girlfriends down in Key Largo, and she said, "Hey, I have a friend coming to Gainesville, and I want to send you back with your mother's rose." And I was like, "What rose is that?" And she says, "I don't know what it's called, but it's this pink rose and it just does great, doesn't die. And it's been growing here in Key Largo with no problem. And I made you a sucker of it." And her friend brought it to me and I planted it in the landscape and it's doing great. And I have my mom's rose, which would have been long forgotten if this friend hadn't have shared it with me. So I'm very, very happy to have that. And one of my Rosarian friends ID'd it as Carefree Beauty. So I appreciate that. All right. Next up. Wolf writes that Americans were proud of the country that had been transformed from a dismal wilderness to cornfields and laden fruit trees. Do you think that Americans today still value cultivated space over wild lands? And then are trees still viewed as obstacles, or do you think they are treasured as much as they become more and more scarce? And Teresa says pecan trees makes her think of her grandfather. He grew them to sell and she always enjoyed being with him in the field. That's really nice, Teresa. Well, first of all, I want to think about how I don't think it was a dismal wilderness beforehand. You know, we came in and put our values on top of the Native Americans' values. You know, we brought those European ideals with us that we wanted to see all the straight lines of corn and fruit trees, and maybe when some of you all read that, I was wondering what you thought about that.
This is Barb. I think we've made a lot of mistakes in the past. And this is what I kept thinking about the whole time I was reading the book. You know, they're bringing all these plants in from all the other states, and they're putting them in a state where they don't really exist. But they're forcing them to grow. And some of them did fine, and some of them didn't do so well. And I see that when I plant non-natives down here in my yard. The natives seem to do better than the non-natives, even though I try and force them and baby them along. We have, as a culture, well, if you live out on the land, if you're a farmer, you're going to think cultivated land is the way to go. But, you know, we ruined the Midwest and the Dust Bowl and all of that stuff. I mean, we've really done some silly stuff. Lawns, the monoculture of lawn is, probably not a great idea either. So I think we're reverting back to the more natural spaces, as long as people still have enough space to live in, because there's more emphasis on parks and leaving trees and not clear cutting everything. And so maybe we're moving back to where we like the wild lands a little bit more. But I don't know. We'll wait and see. Wait and see.
Yeah, Alice said it was a sadly mistaken attitude of the Europeans. And Susanna says trees are treasured and valuable, although hurricanes scare us with trees. I can't believe it. Yes. And I don't know if we can really even put a value on a tree, but we do put a value on a tree when they are taken down. You know, people have to buy certain number of trees to replant them, or to they actually pay mitigation cost on that. So Suzanne says they are treasured and valuable. They definitely are. And Cindy is continually saddened by the concrete jungles going up and the trees coming down, and I think it hurts all of our hearts. And luckily, we do have a lot of wilderness preserved in our national parks, said Lauren, which is true. And Lauren says, unfortunately, developers are plowing down forests. Money does still seem to talk. The wilding movement is taking hold in small bases. And MJ says, trees are the first to be torn down, and then we try to replant. We do need to focus on the natives. And Gail says, I wish trees were more treasured. Many of my neighbors like to have their yards treeless, and insurance companies seem to discourage trees by your house. I love my trees that keep my yard cool. And Margaret says she keeps on making her New Hampshire lawn smaller each year with flowers, trees, and vegetables. And Natasha chimed in and says, even the farmlands are becoming urban now, both wild and agricultural areas are disappearing. Well, it's just, yeah, it's happening. As our population booms. But then I was just up in upstate New York, and the farmlands are still there, and people are, you know, they're leaving some parts of the country, they're migrating to other parts of the country. So we're seeing a real shift there. And Julia said 5 mature live oaks came down in my neighborhood in the last few years. It's just a tragedy. We need to try to keep those as much as we can, for sure.
Yeah, in my city and county, it's such a struggle between environmentalists and developers. You know, and trying everybody, we need to speak up more, you know, but it's a challenge to do that, to express our wishes to the city council, county commissioners, you know, and be involved more to be able to let them, you know, in cases where people have spoken up, then we do have land preserved that will be forever designated that way. So, but we have to keep doing that.
We do. And I think those county arborists and city arborists have a lot of pull. They really do. And then when those comp plans are going in, you know, if you have an opportunity to have the ear on somebody who's on that planning board, or you yourself can be on a tree board or something like that, we really can stand up for these trees and saving these old heritage trees and saying, you can't put your Sonny's barbecue here. And I use that example because that's what happened in Gainesville. They knocked down probably a 200-year-old oak to put in the new Sonny's parking lot. I haven't shopped there. I don't go to that one. So, Lauren says the Nature Conservancy is a great organization preserving native lands. Julia says it seems that the developers always win. Yeah, I'm afraid. And in Jacksonville, Cindy appreciates that they have to get permission in Jacksonville for any tree removal. That's great. And MJ says another situation is the improper pruning to find balance for power lights and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's you know, they spec a live oak in an area that can probably deal with a large, you know, loropetalum, you know, that it's almost a space for a big shrub as opposed to a huge tree. So for sure. Yeah. This is something I don't think the founding gardeners or the founding fathers would ever think we would be talking about, but it is, as the populations have exploded, it certainly is the case. Okay, so that was our last question, but I want to get a lot of feedback from you all. If you have any other things to share, or notes that you wrote, or pages that you dog-eared in the book that made you want to take notice and think about it a little bit more.
Wendy,
Yes.
it's Lauren. The part that stuck with me the most was when George Washington got all these little seedlings and decided to plant them in the winter in the snow. Of course, he had slaves do the work, so he didn't really care that they were going to be digging in tundra. And of course, the trees did not survive. And the expression was like, oh, well, that was an interesting experiment.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to what we've been many people have brought up about how, yes, it's nice to have a native tree, but they didn't quite have the concept of native for where. Just because it was in the 13 colonies didn't mean it would grow every place.
Yep. Yep. They were learning about that. And then Lauren, you brought up the slave issue. You know, I know that other book clubs, Master Gardener book clubs, have avoided this book because of the slave question. And I thought, well, I do really want to read this book together, and I think we can all talk, you know, understand that this was not a great idea. And it's interesting how people are taking the word plantation out of things. You know, they're not even using the word plantation anymore. I don't know if that's revisionist history or what, but it's these gardens were built with slave labor, and I feel like that's terribly unfortunate, but it's, you know, definitely part of our history, the good history and the bad history of our country. So thank you all for being patient enough with that as we were reading that.
Could I
Susanna
just
says,
add one more thing to that, though?
yes, please.
The difference between John Adams and the others was that John Adams was from Massachusetts, and he did not have slave labor in his gardens. And, you know, they kind of ridiculed him for having this little teeny garden. It's kind of, it goes to the whole crux of this country, right? I'm from the North, so obviously I think very differently about this whole issue, but maybe. But I really got a new respect for John Adams, I got to say, and I got a different feeling about our founding fathers, to be honest. All the things we learned in school maybe weren't so accurate.
I feel much better after reading the book about Monticello than I did when I visited there. I was really disgusted with Jefferson for the way that the slaves were treated and their living facilities and the kind of work they did. It was just really frustrating to me and so sad. So at least with reading the book, I have a more positive attitude. I do think Jefferson was an incredibly brilliant man, but the mistreating in so many ways of slaves is so sad.
I really liked learning about Madison. I knew Jefferson was a scientist and had a, you know, a real interest in organizing things and classifying things. And I knew that Washington just wanted to be a farmer. He was reluctantly drafted to being the president and the leader of the revolution. But Madison is the forward thinker in my mind. On page 210, when it starts talking about his address, and he's saying that, you know, we have a real potential to damage the earth if we're not good stewards. I mean, this was so ahead of his time and so forward thinking, and I never ever knew that about Madison.
Yeah, and if you go to his house and see the movie I was talking about, you'll really see he was forward thinking about everything. He sort of predicted what's going on in our country right now. He was really kind of it almost like he could see the future.
Wow. So MJ says, this author combined my favorite topics, U.S. history and horticulture. That's awesome. She's new to the state of Florida and lets her explore new plants and growing seasons. She's lived in Washington State, Illinois, Missouri, and Upper Peninsula of Michigan, even California for a short time. Well, welcome to Florida, MJ. I hope we have a nice, quiet hurricane season this year. And Alice says, it was good to realize how hard it was to actually establish this country. Yeah, you know, I didn't realize how close it was. And I don't remember how long the Revolutionary War took. I mean, it wasn't as fast as I remember. And long after the war, even after long after the war, they made it that so they would need respite in their gardens for sure. Julia says the last quote about pride in cornfields and fruit trees was John Adams in 1750s, but 30 years later, he was anxious that no tree be cut down. Okay. And Julia also recommends Brother Gardeners, also by Andrea Wulf. So that would be, if you really enjoyed this, that would be a good one to jump in and read.
It was. I read it about 10 years ago, and that's why I was so surprised when this book was available for the book club. So that was cool. Yes.
Good. So we have a little quick survey, not about mostly about how you engaged and what books you'd like to see in the future. So it's Becky just popped that in the chat box, so you'll have to open up the chat box and take the survey. You can talk about how if you followed along on Facebook, or if how you engaged in that way. Let us know, and if there's a way we can be more engaging, just let us know. So we will try to figure that out. So you can take the survey, and any other final comments. So Natasha Atlas from our office does the beautiful Facebook post with her art, and she selects the questions and well, we work on them together, but it's very nice that she does that for us. I love it. And I want to thank Natasha for reading along with us. Sometimes she and I would talk about the reading assignments and say, oh, it was hard to stay awake through this week. I was nodding off. And then there was other times when we just burned right through it and enjoyed it so much. But all in all, I feel like I'm a better gardener, and I'm definitely a better American after reading this book. So that's a tall one. So Teresa said, what is the next book? Well, we'll announce it in the spring, but I'm taking suggestions. I've got that's what is going to be going on in the survey. And I do have a few suggestions already. So if you have some good gardening suggestions for books, go ahead and pop that in there, and would be happy to see what everybody wants to read. And Alice says, I wish I had started this book club in the beginning. Yeah, you had a lot of catching up to do, and it was kind of thick. Not a whole lot of dialogue in that book, Alice. So we really had to go through it. But yeah, so thank you all for reading with us. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I definitely caught up on a little bit of history, which is great. And now when I go visit the other gardens, I feel like I'm going to have a much greater understanding and appreciation for them.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Rita. It's always good to keep up with you out there. I love to see your post.
Yes,
And you had a good post today, so that was great news over down there. So I loved it too. I love reading with you all. I do like reading. I'm looking forward to the next book I'm going to read. What are you guys reading right now, just for pleasure, for other stuff? Just either say it or pop it in the chat box.
I don't know. It's so disappointing that the book came to an end. Now I have to think of, my daughter laughed at me last night when I said that to her. Now I got to find something else to read. So
Lauren's reading Eleanor. That's cool. Is anybody reading anything good? Is anybody gonna read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver? That's a good one. Oh, Cindy's reading Finding Dorothy. Dictionary of Lost Words. Lauren says it's on her list. Barbara Kingsolver. Barbara Kingsolver, she kind of has an extension connection somehow. I don't know what it is, but she does talk about plants and horticulture a lot. Cindy says the Demon Copperhead is fantastic. Okay, I'm ordering it today. That's my next one. Julia loved it. Okay, good. Oh, Lauren just finished The Book of Hope by Jane Goodall. That sounds awesome. Julia just finished reading Pride and Prejudice. That sounds amazing to do again. Must Love Flowers. That sounds neat.
Oh.
So, and Natasha, I guess we're talking about Barbara Kingsolver is your favorite author. You'll have to come and talk to me about that in a minute. So, oh, Starting Travels on the St. John's by by the Bartrams. Travels on the St. John's River. Is that the little skinny one, Shanna? Yeah, you're going to get a lot of insight into William Bartram and John Bartram. It's a cool little book. It's kind of an offbeat book, but I just loved it. Cindy said Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver would be a great MGB book club. All right, I will check in that. Yep. And Shannon's excited about being in Volusia County. I'm excited about that too. Half Broke Horses. Is that a horse book, Teresa? Yeah. Okay. She said, yeah, it's a horse book. Okay. All right. Okay, guys. Well, it's almost 2:00. Thank you for reading with us this summer. I love it. You know, the book club kind of came about during COVID as a way for us to stay connected. But I like that we're just doing, we continue to do this and read together. So, we'll read with you next summer, and I hope to see some of you all at your district Master Gardener Advanced Training courses that are happening in September of October coming up. And have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you really soon. Thank you all. Thanks, everybody. Take care.